Good evening. My name is John Lewis. Some people call me the boy from Troy, Alabama. Lonnie, thank you for those kind words of introduction. Mr. Superintendent, Mr. Assistant Superintendent, Mr. Principal, and to all members of the faculty, all you wonderful, gifted teachers, parents, and members of the student body. I'm delighted, very happy, and very pleased to be here. Now, I didn't grow up in a big city like Evanston, a big city like Springfield, Rockford, Atlanta, or Washington, D.C. I grew up in rural Alabama, 50 miles from Montgomery, outside of a little place called Troy. My father was a sharecropper, a tenant farmer. When you read March, Book 1, Book 2, Book 3, you will discover that I grew up very, very poor in a very large family with 6 brothers and 3 sisters, wonderful mother and father, wonderful grandparents and great-grandparents. But I remember in 1944, when I was only 4 years old, my father had saved $300. And with the $300, a man sold him 110 acres of land. My family still owns this land today. On this farm, there is a lot of cotton and corn, peanuts, hogs, cows, and chickens. Sometime as a young child, I would be out there working in the field, picking cotton, gathering peanuts, pulling corn. And my mother would say, boy, you need to catch up. You're falling behind. And I would say, this is hard work. And she would say, hard work never killed anybody. I said, well, it's about to kill me. But growing up there on the farm, it was my responsibility to care for the chickens. And I fell in love with raising chickens. Those of you who have read March, Book 1, I tell the story of raising chickens. How many of you in here know anything about raising chickens? Oh, that's pretty good. What happened to the rest of us? Well, as a little boy, when the setting hen was set, I would take the fresh eggs, mark them with a pencil, place them under the setting hen, and wait for 3 long weeks for the little chicks to hatch. I know some of you are saying now, John Lewis, why do you mark those fresh eggs with a pencil before you place them under the setting hen? Well, from time to time, another hen would get on that same nest, and there would be some more fresh eggs, and you had to be able to tell the fresh eggs from the eggs that were already under the setting hen. You follow me? You don't follow me. It's okay. It's all right. So when the little chicks were hatched, I would fool these setting hens. I would take the little chicks and give them to another hen. Or put them in a box with a lantern, raise them on their own, get some more fresh eggs, mark them with a pencil, place them under the setting hen, encourage the setting hen to stay on the nest for another 3 long weeks. And when I think about it, it was not the right thing to do. It was not the moral thing to do. It was not the most loving thing to do. It was not the most nonviolent thing to do. It was not the most democratic thing to do. But I was never quite able to save $18.98 to order the most inexpensive incubator and hatch it from the Cicero bookstore. I know the students are too young, but maybe your grandparents, teachers are too young. But do you remember the Cicero book catalog? Some of you really do. Don't fool me. That big book, heavy book, thick book. Some people call it the ordering book. Other people call it the wish book. I wish I had this. I wish I had that. So I just kept on wishing. But as a little boy, about 9 years old, I become very good at raising chickens. But I wanted to be a minister. One of my uncles had Santa Claus to bring me a Bible. I learned to read the Bible. And from time to time, with the help of my brothers and sisters and cousins, we would gather all of our chickens together in the chicken yard, like you're gathered here in this beautiful auditorium. And we would have church. My brothers and sisters, cousins would line the outside of the chicken yard. Then I would start speaking or preaching. And when I look back on it, some of these chickens would bow their heads. Some of these chickens would shake their heads. They never quite said amen. But when I look back and think about it really, some of those chickens were just a little more productive than some of my colleagues in the Congress. And those chickens, at least they produce eggs. Well, when we would visit the little town of Troy, visit Montgomery, visit Tuskegee, visit Birmingham, I saw those signs that said, white men, white women, white waiting, colored waiting. As a little boy, to go downtown to the theater on a Saturday to see a movie, all of us little black children had to go upstairs to the balcony, and all of the little white children went downstairs to the first floor. And I would come home and ask my mother, ask my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, why? And they would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. But in 1955, 15 years old, in the 10th grade, I heard of Rosa Parks. I heard the words of Martin Luther King Jr. on our radio. The action of Rosa Parks, the words and leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. inspired me to find a way to get in the way. I was so inspired that in 1956, at the age of 16, with some of my brothers and sisters and cousins, we went down to the public library, trying to get library cards. We wanted to check out some books. And we were told by the librarian that the library was for whites only and not for coloreds. I never went back to that library until July 5th, 1998. By this time I'm in the Congress for a book signing of my first book, Walking with the Wind. Hundreds of blacks and whites showed up in at the program. They gave me a library card. It says something about the distance we've come and the progress we've made. I go back for a moment. When I finished high school in May of 1957, age of 17, I applied to attend a little college 10 miles from my home called Troy State College, now known as Troy University. Submitted my application, my high school transcript. I never heard a word from the school. So I wrote a letter to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I didn't tell my mother, my father, any of my sisters or brothers, any of my teachers. I told Dr. King I needed his help. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote me back and sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket and invited me to come to Montgomery to meet with him. In the meantime, I had been accepted at a little college in Nashville, Tennessee. An uncle of mine, one of my mother's brothers, gave me a $100 bill, more money than I ever had. Gave me one of these Foot Locker. Most of you know what a Foot Locker is? One of those big trunks that you can bring them open, bring them back together. Had the drawers that you can put things in. Then it had a place where you can hang. Well, I had one of those. I put everything that I owned, except those chickens, in that Foot Locker, and took a Greyhound bus to Nashville, Tennessee. And after being there for a few days, I told one of my teachers that I'd been in contact with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This teacher and Dr. King had studied at Morehouse College together in Atlanta. He informed Dr. King that I was there. Martin Luther King Jr. got back in church and suggested when I was home for spring break to come and see him. So in March of 1958, by this time I'm 18 years old, I boarded a Greyhound bus, traveled from Troy to Montgomery, and a young lawyer, never seen a lawyer before, a young man by the name of Fred Gray, who was the lawyer for Rosa Parks, for Dr. King, became our lawyer during the Freedom Ride and the march from Selma to Montgomery, met me and drove me to the First Baptist Church, pastored by the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, a colleague of Dr. King. Ushered me into the pastor's study, or some would call the office of the church. I saw Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy standing behind a desk. And Dr. King said, "Are you the boy from Troy? Are you John Lewis?" And I said, "Dr. King, I am John Robert Lewis." I gave my whole name, and he started calling me the boy from Troy. He said to me, in effect, if we continued to pursue my interest in going there, my family could lose the land, our home could be bombed or burned, go back and have a discussion with my mother and my father. With whatever I decided to do, they would support me. Had a discussion with my mother and my father. They were so afraid. We dropped the whole idea of my attending Troy State College, now known as Troy University. So I continued to study in Nashville. So it was in Nashville that Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks and Thurgood Marshall and others would come and speak. There was a young minister there studying at Vanderbilt University, working for the Fellowship of Reconciliation on the side, named James Lawson, who started conducting nonviolent workshops. So a whole group of students, every Tuesday night at 6:30 p.m., we would meet at a little church where we studied the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. Not just college students, but some high school students. And many of us grew to accept the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence as a way of life, as a way of living. We started sitting in, had tests sit in the fall and winter of 1959. We sitting there waiting to be served, and someone would come up and spit on us. They'll put a lighted cigarette out in our hair, down our backs, pour hot water, hot coffee, hot chocolate on us, spit on us, then pull us off the lunch counter stool. When we came back after the holidays, we heard that the students in Greensboro, North Carolina would be sitting in. And then on February the 1st, they started sitting in. And the sit-in movement spread around the South like wildfire, with the support of many, many college students and community organizations and different groups from around the country. In Nashville, Tennessee, we heard that if we continued to sit in, we'd probably get arrested on the next sit-in. And I wanted to look what young people in some neighborhoods and community used to call sharp. You know the phrase sharp? Fresh. You know about fresh? Clean. Well, I wanted to look sharp, fresh, clean, but I had very little money. I wanted a new suit. If I were going to go to jail, just look good. So I went to a used men's store in downtown Nashville and bought this unbelievable suit. And a vest came with it. Some of the older guys here may recognize what it was called Barton. You never heard me do this, huh? No. Barton 500. Any of you recognize that label? No, you don't. You recognize it? Yeah, there's some witness here. Well, I bought this suit. Vest came with it. I got arrested. February 27, 1960, my first arrest. And I walked out of that place, and the officers behind me, 89 of us. I felt liberated. I felt free. If I still had that suit today, I probably could sell it on eBay for a lot of money. Andrew, this young man here, my friend, my young brother, did some research, and he was able to locate a photograph of me being arrested and taken to jail. And I was walking with pride and dignity, just picking them up and laying them down, really. During the 60s, I was arrested 40 times. Since being in Congress, 5 more times. And I'm probably going to get arrested again for something. My philosophy is very simple. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have an obligation, have a mission and a mandate to speak up, to speak out and find a way to get in the way. Get in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble. When we had to sit in, or some people would call it sit down, on the floor of the House, in the well of the House. Every Democratic member from this great state supported us, stood with us, and participated. I tell you, March, book 1, not book 2, book 3, tell the story of a proud group of people, black and white, Hispanic, Asian American, and Native American, men and women, straight and gay, people of all faith, some who put their bodies on the line to bring us to the point where we are today. There are forces in America today that want to take us back, but we must say over and over again that we've come too far, made too much progress, and we're not going back. We're going forward. Just think a few short years ago, in my native state of Alabama, the people were asked to count the number of bubbles on a bar of soap, the number of jelly beans in a jar. People stood in immovable lines. There was one county in Alabama, Lowndes County, between Selma and Montgomery. The county was more than 80% African American, but there was not a single registered African American voter in the county. Teachers, lawyers, doctors, college professors, farmers and housewives could not register to vote simply because of the color of their skin. People were murdered. Some of you are old enough to remember that on June 21st, 1964, during the Mississippi Freedom Summer, 3 young men that I knew, Andy Goodman, Mickey Sherner, James Shaney, 2 young white men, 1 young African-American man, went out to investigate the burning of an African-American church to be used for voter registration workshop. They were stopped by the sheriff, taken to jail. Later that same evening, they were taken from the jail, turned over to the Klan, where they were beaten, shot, and killed. Their bodies were discovered 6 weeks later, buried under a mound of dirt. March is saying that these 3 young men didn't die in Vietnam, or the Middle East, or Africa, or Central or South America. They died right here in our own country. So that's why I said the vote is precious. It's almost sacred in a democratic society such as ours. It is the most powerful nonviolent instrument or tool that we have in a democratic society, and we should make it open and available to everybody and stop blocking people for attempting to participate in the democratic process. It is our hope that March will inspire another generation to stand up, to speak up, to speak out, and lead us to a better place, to create that beloved community where we can redeem the soul of America. And if we get it right here in America, maybe, just maybe, it will serve as a model. Maybe our country can serve as a model for the rest of the world. And I tell you, my story in March, it's not just my story, but it's a story of many other people involved in the movement. It's saying, in effect, when people say nothing has changed, I feel like saying, come and walk in my shoes. Come and walk in my shoes. Brave and courageous men and women. They gave everything they had. I want to go back for just one moment. Just think in 1961, the same year that President Barack Obama was born. 1961. The Freedom Ride. Black people and white people can be seated together on a Greyhound bus, a trailway bus leaving the nation capital. We were testing a decision of the United States Supreme Court. But because of what we did, it led to more than 400 people being arrested and jailed in Mississippi. They were sent to the state penitentiary at Parchman with one of the original 13 Freedom Riders. It was dangerous, but we did it. Now, black, white, Latino, Asian American, Native American can ride and sit together all across America. We have to come to that point and say to all of us, we must never, ever be afraid. Never lose hope. Never give up. Never get lost in a sea of despair. And never hate. As Dr. King would say, hate is too heavy a burden to bear. The way of love is a better way. Just love everybody and lay down the tools and instrument of violence. Why did we come together and take part in a sit-in on the floor? Were we moved by the spirit of history? But did something strike us down? No, we just got tired of our colleagues not saying anything or doing anything to try to end gun violence in America. More than 85 to 90% of the American people want us to do something, want us to act, and we should act. So I just want to close and let Andrew come up. And so take the long, hard look. Hopefully you won't get arrested. You won't go to jail. But whatever you do, do it in an orderly, peaceful, non-violent fashion. We can have a victory. We can create that beloved community. We can redeem the soul of America and create a society at peace with itself. Can we do it? Yeah. Will we do it? Let's do it. Andrew Aydin. Thank you. Talk about the book.
How do you follow that? My name is Andrew Aydin. I serve as digital director and policy advisor in the Congressional office, and I'm the co-author of March. In a sense, I tweet for a living. You probably don't recognize me right now because of the photograph that they had up there. That kid was 12. He didn't have a beard. So let me tell you why I have a beard. My father was a Muslim immigrant. I was raised by a single mother after my father left when I was 3. And when I got to be a teenager, as I'm sure some of your teachers here are dealing with as well, I could grow facial hair. And my mother did not like this. She had a reason, though. She said she didn't want me to look Muslim. She didn't want me to make it harder for myself. I was raised Methodist. I went to a Presbyterian school and a Jesuit grad school. But she was still right. The first time I ever heard from my father was 3 weeks after September 11th. If I'm totally honest, he was probably afraid he was about to get deported. And if I'm totally honest, I didn't care. It's a hell of a thing not to know your father. So imagine, put yourself in my shoes. It's December of last year. And a madman starts talking about how the children of Muslim immigrants, how Muslim immigrants should be banned from this country. They shouldn't be allowed here. They're dangerous. Well, me and my Jesuit education over here is quite, look at us, we're all here, right? Yes, it is dangerous, but not for the reason he thought. I'd spent years going around with John Lewis, hearing his message. You have to speak up and speak out when you see something that's not right. And here I was seeing something that was more than not right. So I called my mom, because that's the nonviolent way. You have to tell everybody first. And I said, Mama, I'm going to grow a beard. You say, you better not. I said, I love you, Mama, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I did. And it's funny because I talked about this at Comic-Con. Yeah, John Lewis goes to Comic-Con. And I'm that nerd who brought him. You know, I talked about this at Comic-Con. It was the last place I think people expected, so they wrote a news story about it. And people were putting it on the internet. Andrew Aydin's beard is a political statement. And I'm like, okay. Because it's not a political statement. It's not political to say that you shouldn't hate people. But it is a nonviolent act. Because one of the things we forget, we think nonviolence, sometimes it's a march, sometimes a protest, sometimes it's educating and sensitizing, as you do here in this school. And so my mission has been to sensitize and educate the people on Capitol Hill who I work with, who are my colleagues, who may have outdated and unfounded notions about what it is to be the child of a Muslim immigrant. And so if you have read March, you know we've made a contribution. We have touched a sacred story and told it to a new generation. And so that's why I grew my beard. Now, you probably asked yourself at one point, why would John Lewis write a graphic novel? Some people call it a comic book. And I'm proud to say it's my fault. It all started in the summer of 2008. I was serving as the Congressman's press secretary on his re-election campaign. And you know, campaigns are tough. 60, 70, 80 hours a week, especially in Georgia during the summer. Little known fact, John Lewis doesn't sweat. But I do. And so we were starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We were starting to talk about what we were going to do after. Some folks said they were going to go to the beach. Some folks said they were going to see their parents. I said, I'm going to a comic book convention. And everybody laughed at me except for one person. I heard a deep voice say, don't laugh. There's a comic book during the movement, and it was very influential. And it was John Lewis standing up for me as he stood up for so many of us. But I became captivated. I mean, he told me about this comic. It was called Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Story. And I went home that night, I looked it up on the internet, I read it, it was beautiful. It was 16 pages. Sort of that Studio House 50 style. Really well done. I was amazed at the date when I realized it had been created just a few years after Congress had nearly destroyed the comic book industry. And so here I'd spent this summer watching John Lewis tell the story of the sit-ins, the story of the Freedom Rides, the story of the March on Washington and the Freedom Summer and Selma. And I'd grown up in Atlanta. He had been my congressman since I was 3 years old. I went to Atlanta public schools. I went to a prep school, and nobody had told me about SNCC. Nobody had told me about the contributions of young people during the movement. I heard 9 words: Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, I have a dream. And I was raised in the cradle of the civil rights movement. That's all I heard. And so I thought something only a 24-year-old could think was a good idea. I thought John Lewis should write a comic book. But it was funny because the first time I said it out loud to him, he was really nice. He said, well, maybe. Which, if you ever work in politics, you'll know is a very nice way of saying no. But I was convinced this could work, like from the beginning. I couldn't get it out of my head. And so I kept asking. I mean, you know, we'd have these meetings, everybody talk about, how do we teach young people about the civil rights movement? Hello? How do we teach them about nonviolence and how to organize? I was like, comic books, have you heard of them? Until one day I said it just that one more time. And John Lewis turned to me and he said, you know what? I'll do it, but only if you write it with me. And that moment changed my life. We spent 5 years working on that first one. No one thought it was a good idea other than us two at the time. I got rejected by publishers. Everybody in Capitol Hill laughed at me. I mean, I spent years getting laughed. Oh, it's the comic book kid. Here he comes. Yeah, hide your daughter. But the idea just seemed so important to me. And so we would work at night. We would work on weekends. I mean, he has a day job. We would find small moments in an elevator when nobody else was looking. We'd be like, hey, what do you think about this? And we did it for 5 years. One time the congressman let me and Nate, who later came on board, he's our artist, who does this beautiful, amazing work. We go down to Alabama. I'm about to get on an elevator, and oh my gosh, there's Ethel Kennedy. She's on the elevator. And she's with John Siegenthaler, Robert Kennedy's aide. And then later the publisher of the Nashville Tennessean. And I just couldn't help myself. I said, excuse me, hey, I thought y'all might want to know, you're in a comic book that I'm working on with John Lewis. And Ethel Kennedy looks up at me, and she's still got these big, beautiful eyes, and she says, well, that's nice, dear. But that, you know, the moment we knew, the moment we went from working on an idea to knowing that we had done something, came just before March Book 1 was released. And I got a phone call from a reporter at a very conservative newspaper that shall remain nameless. And he said, look, man, I loved your book. I don't usually do this, but I decided to give it to my 9-year-old son. And he read it, and then he went and put on his Sunday suit, and now he's marching around my house demanding equality for everyone. Imagine if we could instill a social consciousness in every 9-year-old in America. Imagine what this country would be like in a generation. Or what about college freshmen? We went to LSU in fall of 2013. Student government gave out free copies of March. We gave a speech. A couple hundred students came. One of them was a woman named Blair Amani. She said, you know what, I read your book, I loved it, and then I heard you speak, and I think I've decided I don't want to go into business, I want to be an activist. Great. Go for it. And boy, did she. Because we got a phone call a couple weeks ago from Blair Amani saying that she was the one who had organized the protest in Baton Rouge in response to Alton Sterling's death. She got arrested, she went to jail. When she got out, she held a vigil for the police officers who'd been shot and killed. It says something about the power of nonviolence when someone who had just been put in jail can empathize with those that put them there, who can hold a vigil and honor their memory and realize that violence is the greatest scourge we face. I'm really glad to be here because you guys are teaching this. For the rest of the country, there's something called the 9-word problem. I mentioned it before. All right? Most students graduate from high school, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, knowing only 9 words about the civil rights movement: Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, and I Have a Dream. And that's it. 47 states are failing, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, to adequately teach the civil rights movement, including the state of Illinois. Now, you guys are changing that. We had a little something to do with it. March is being taught in schools like New York City Public Schools, San Francisco Unified School District. I got a few more that are going to be coming in the fall that are ready to announce. But you guys being on the leading edge, I need you to get every town in the area, a big one down the street, you know. Do what you can. You know, the movement was this force for young people coming into government. So many of the people who came out of the civil rights movement went on to be great leaders in our government. And as I have spent now 10 years in Congress, don't see them. They can't afford to go to college and then work in the public sector. I believe if we can teach this generation to use nonviolence, the first thing that they should do is go after student loans. Doesn't mean it's the worst problem, doesn't mean it's the most pressing in terms of numbers or immediacy, but I think it is the only way we can create an activist generation, because we have so many problems that have been swept under the rug that we're now finally able to look at because of the ubiquity of technology, the ubiquity of cell telephones and camera phones and GoPros and everything else that's letting us see all of this injustice that people have been talking about for years, but refusing to acknowledge until they actually had it on YouTube. We need to get to all of it. But we're going to need an entire generation devoted to being an activist. Let me put it another way. When John Lewis got married in 1969, the wedding announcement read, "Lillian Miles to wed. Unemployed political activist John Lewis." People who are ahead of their time pay a price. And we must lift the burden of debt so that this generation is free to pay the price for us. Now, I mentioned Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Story earlier. And I mentioned I went to grad school too, which did at the same time as we were reading March. I'm a masochist. We were writing that and doing both. And I wrote my graduate thesis on Martin Luther King and the Montgomery's history and how it was used to inspire some of the early acts of civil disobedience, because I wanted it to be a proof of concept. I wanted to show that a comic book like March, a graphic novel, could be used once more. And several of the things we found was, one, you had Jim Lawson and Bayard Rustin and Glenn Smiley, and all these pivotal figures who had come out of this organization called the Fellowship of Reconciliation, touring around the country with this comic book, giving nonviolence workshops, talking to the students, and leaving the comic book behind as a guide and a tool for those who couldn't make it, for those who needed to study, for those who needed inspiration. And that's what we're doing. Whether it's the two of us or we have Nate with us, we're going all around the country. And we're speaking to students, and it's working. Whether it's Blair Amani or the student this afternoon at Loyola who came up with a legal reason for why the cost of higher education violates international treaties that the United States has signed. That's pretty cool, right? But you never know where that student is going to be. The next John Lewis could be here. One of your students. One of you in this room. One of the things that always struck me as I was getting exhausted by the March process and writing it, because there's so much research. And we were lucky because so much of it was online for the first time. You know, one of the things that struck me, we found that Martin Luther King actually helped edit that comic book. Yeah, right? Doesn't that blow your mind, though? Martin Luther King Jr., comic book editor. Gave me some kinship. So if he can do it, and John Lewis can do it, we can read this. We can take it home. We can pass it around. We can give it to other people. So that when I get that phone call from Ethel Kennedy, a couple years after she laughed at me, saying that March was the first graphic novel ever to win the Robert F. Kennedy Book Award, there are no boundaries. They've been broken down. You just have to see it. Let me tell you one more story. Like I said, I liked comic books as a kid. And I would actually bring them to school. And at one point, I had them out on my desk in English class. And my English teacher saw them. And she came up, she took them away. She said, "You can't have these out right now. They're not real books." Well, I got to go back to my high school. Brought Congressman Lewis along. And frankly, had a wonderful discussion with that teacher about her experiences teaching March in her classrooms. I don't say this story as any form of comeuppance to the teacher, because I genuinely believe she is doing the Lord's work and expressing the prevailing wisdom of the time. But I offer this as an example of the power of an idea whose time has come, and the brief period in which change is possible. And so I ask all of you, join us. March. Thank you.